Real estate players in India, mainly developers, are feeling confident that the country's property sector is going to see a revival in sales, in demand and investments after a long period of sluggishness. But how upbeat are foreign players, global players about India? Let's find out. We're in conversation with Todd Lickerman, Global Chief Executive Officer of DTZ. Todd, thank you so much for giving us time.
Yes, thank you for having me today.
To begin with, let me ask you, now that we have a stable majority government in place at the center in India, are you viewing India differently? Are you more confident, or are you adopting a strategy of caution?
Well, sure. So we're a services company, so we enable services, either corporates coming in and out or investors deploying capital. And anytime the government gets easier to work in a place like India and easier to process decisions through, that's a good thing. I think it'll attract more outside investment. I think you'll see the corporates expand here a little bit more freely, and it should be just a good thing in general for business, which is good for our business because we can help house them and we can help get the projects done, and it should just create more fluidity. So there's a lot of excitement in the air in India today.
So a lot of excitement in the air in India. Which sectors, which segments in the Indian real estate market are you looking at? Where do you see growth happening? Where are the opportunities?
Well, there's a couple of areas. I think the introduction of REITs is going to be a very big deal. If it follows any path that we've seen in other countries, that'll produce an awful lot of liquidity, which will bring capital to stock and should really bolster the entire market. But we follow corporates, so we think as corporate confidence grows and continues to grow, that'll support job creation, it'll support more office space. So we're bullish on the office market. We're bullish on residential. There's some great schemes now in India, and there's a lot of interest in investing. And so I think residential will continue to grow, the quality continue to get better, and you'll see some pretty exciting things happening.
All right. Now moving on to what's happening globally, can you give us an insight into any developing trends that affect India? Our viewers would like to know what is in store for India if anything happens globally to economies around the world.
Well, sure, a lot is happening now. Actually, Europe is making its way through, coming out of its recession and making its way through, which is good. The US has made its way through the recession, and we're starting to see, we've seen economic growth among corporates in the US. We haven't seen real job growth until just now. So just now we're starting to see job growth, which is pent-up demand, which I think will encourage more offshoring or doing work around the world, even more so than it has in the past. And I think as the job shortage in the US shows up, and it's a bit masked by the recession, but when you really look at our unemployment, it's sub 7%. In an economy of our size, that is pretty manageable, and that's going to mean demand for talent. And there's a real war for talent happening in our country, and there will in the United States, and that's going to produce companies that say, where should we do work? Just like our technology, we're going to do that here because it makes sense and we can. So I think you'll see more deal flow and more US corporates working around the world. I think you'll see more capital coming out of Japan and China for investment. For India, maybe from Japan. But there's an awful lot of pent-up capital in Japan that will find its way to Europe, find its way to the US, and find its way to India, I think, in a big way.
Okay. Should we be concerned about the rumored property bubble people keep talking about in China? Is there something like that even happening in China? How much truth?
Well, there's an awful lot of popularity of property in China, and there's a lot of cash. There's a lot of capital tied up in China, and big families, big concentration of capital. And property is a hedge. It's a bit of a hedge against inflation, and people like property in China. So there is a bit of a enthusiasm around property. There's also growth, though. There's just pure inflationary growth in China, which will help that quite a bit. I think what you'll start to see is migration of that capital outside of China. So maybe not so concentrated right in China, which will help dampen the price increases, any sort of euphoric effects or any bubble effects. So I think as that sort of cools down, and you've seen that now, you start to see that capital finding other places in the world. It'll come to Europe, it'll come to the US. That'll help other parts of the world. I think it'll moderate China. But there's so much in and out of China, manufacturing, there's foreign investment that's now starting to go into China. But I think that has a curve to sustain itself for quite some time. So I don't see a bubble, in terms of a big bang there right now. But there has been a lot of enthusiasm over the years.
Coming back to India, in recent weeks, recent months, when the new government came in, a number of announcements have been made, especially with respect to creating these new cities. 100 new smart cities is their vision, creating housing for all by 2022. So as a global property player, how excited are you about these plans, or do you think it's just too futuristic to even think about now?
No, I think it's very exciting, because if you look at places like China, where they led building cities from the center, they did it to deploy capital to create jobs. It was done as part of a plan. I think India is going to be the other way around. I think it's going to be more bottoms up. There's more demand. It's more customer related, and the cities will come up around real, true pent up demand. And if you look at the demographics in India, it's quite a young country. And as you look at that, you look at housing needs and infrastructure needs. It's going to be a pretty exciting time, and the real question will be is, can the capital be deployed, in the right way, and can it do it in a way that's truly Indian and makes sense? But I think the Indian economy and management style and the entrepreneurialism that exists and the democracy that exists in India will make it fit right for India. And I think it's going to be an exciting time. We're happy to be part of it.
There's a lot of talk that a lot of these foreign investors are waiting on the sidelines, waiting for that right signal to come re-enter India. What are you hearing from your colleagues abroad, from your industry fellows? Are they now once again looking at India to invest?
Yeah, I think it takes two things. One, it takes health at home. So the foreign investors need to feel good, or need to have access to their capital, or the positiveness to actually deploy. And I think that's gotten good really across the board. And then it takes, can it happen? And I think if India has had any challenge, it's been how difficult is it to actually, how do they really feel about foreign investment? And how difficult is it to execute? And certainly that's been a little bit of a challenge in the past, although India's grown wonderfully with that. And I think any streamlining of that, what the new government looks to, will be only positive. So you see, there was an article by John Chambers from Cisco, very positive on India. And so we only hear hopeful, positive things. So I think there's some first steps to do, but I think you'll see corporate sentiment and investor sentiment be quite open to.
Okay, and lastly, what is your outlook for property markets in India, commercial or residential? Where do you see them headed in terms of growth? Where do you see the opportunities?
Well, I think it's going to follow GDP in many ways, right? So I think you have to look at what the new government's going to do. All indications are positive, are very positive. So I think sentiment from outside the country is high, is good, and is hopeful. So I think if GDP grows to where it should be, high single digits, property can do a little bit better than that, right? Because we're housing ahead of the demand, and there's good supply of capital, both inside and externally. So I think it's pretty good. But again, it's a big, complex place, as everyone here knows. And there's a big job for the government to be done, and there's so much to be done in India. So it's exciting, but at the same time it's a bit daunting, right? So I don't think the question is will it. It's just sort of at what pace and when. But certainly, if you look backwards, we're much more bullish going forward than the world has come through the GFC in a pretty good way. A lot of the countries that India is interdependent on have gotten to a positive state. And so I think the global cross-border flow of business is going to be back up and running. And I think India is only going to benefit from that to India going forward.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you.